So this afternoon I thought I would share with you a few observations and thoughts about doubt, especially about doubting ourselves and our capacity to train. Now, it's something we don't speak about much. I must admit I haven't done myself. It'd be something I think I would admit would be quite difficult to take to a Sanzen. And I kind of question to myself, why would that be? It seems as though it's something we just don't want to admit to, as though it's a failure or a major mistake. And if we don't speak about it, of course, it leaves us alone with it. So I've been pondering on this for quite some time, and I thought that's what I would share with you today, just some thoughts and observations. And especially what I'd hope to you to do is to encourage you to be open to look for yourself at doubts when you get it, if you do. And maybe just to reduce the fear of it, just by talking about it. It's not what we think, so I want to try and show something of that. And to show that it is just something we can train with, as anything. Our practice is amply adequate to cope with anything that we can find in our experience. But we need to find a way in. And I think the only way to make progress with this is through our own direct experience of it. So the only way is when you're in it. But it is also helpful, I think, to talk about it with other people. And if you're thinking, oh, well, this isn't particularly relevant for me at the moment, I think just about everything I say applies also to fear or to anger or to other things. So, well, for me, addressing doubt just hasn't been on the radar at all for many years. I must admit, it didn't even occur to me for a good number of years of training. The way it was that if doubt came up, just kind of get through it, relief when it's finished, and then just put it behind me. Phew! I mean, that approach means that you have to keep going through the same experience each time, and you don't really see or learn anything. And it probably, I think, reinforces the doubt because you're not really facing it. So what I thought I'd do is just give you a few observations of things that I've found for myself and the best way I can describe them, and see if any of them ring a bell for you. And I hope it might also help you to get thinking about what your own experience is of it. Well, first thing that struck me is to recognise that it's not a problem that doubt arises. That doubt comes unbidden. It's not our fault. It's not something we do. When that initial doubt comes up, I hope you can recognise that. It comes unbidden. And usually, I think, possibly always, it's triggered by something. So it'd be triggered by a situation where we feel insecure, maybe where there's also a lot going on, we're feeling under pressure. So it's triggered. And in fact, any situation could trigger doubt. If you're feeling insecure, I mean, just about anything not going very well can make you doubt yourself. But it isn't really about the issue. If you can see that other people have quite different triggers for ourselves, depending on their past experience. So doubt comes unbidden, it's triggered, and then it seems to me pretty clear that it's fed by some maybe unacknowledged assumptions and fears and views that we have kind of beneath the surface of it. So it's different for each of us depending on our past, but the fact that it isn't just a thought explains, I think, why it is a strong experience. So really helpful, I think, a simple thing to do is to come to see what triggers doubt for you. And I think the clearer that you see that, the more it helps you to recognise that this is familiar territory. Because the kind of things that I doubt myself about, they're the same old territory actually. It's very rare that you get something brand new that you might doubt. The issue would be different, but what's underneath, I think it's the same old territory really. So, another thing I notice about doubt is that what happens when you do get engaged with it, it's kind of like a stepping away from being present. And then we pick up an old story from our past. I'm not good enough, I'm too selfish, I lack patience, I can't do this. Whatever it is for you, there's something there we pick up And then we go with that without question. And rerunning this old story brings back all the feelings that we've had in the past. And as this happens, thoughts get entangled, and thoughts and feelings start playing off against each other. So what I mean is, if you think, oh, I can't do this, I mean, that feels pretty awful. And then feeling pretty awful, we think, wow, I've got a problem here. And you say, I've got a problem here, then you feel dreadful. And in a way, this is escalation, and we get lost in suffering. And actually what feels to me is that we recreate a self who lacks. Sometimes with doubt, and maybe it's all the time, and perhaps I've just missed it sometimes, but sometimes with doubt you can definitely get a warning bell, like a feeling will come, don't go there. There's something in us kind of knows, a sort of intuition. And sometimes we might pick up on that, but quite often I think we miss it. Another thing about doubt, I think, is that when you're caught up in doubt, it can seem to temporarily wipe out anything that we've learnt about practice. So any little insights or understanding we have, any fruits of training, they kind of seem not to be accessible to us, like we can't find them. So we can find ourselves feeling quite exposed as being weak or whatever. So quite a bit of fear can come. Another thing that struck me is that when we stop feeding the storyline of doubt, the inadequacy, the story actually starts to fall apart. This is really important to see. A story needs to be recreated and held together. If you stop paying attention to it, it starts all sort of falling to bits. And when that happens, what you're left with is the raw feelings that come with doubts, which could be quite strong. Now the question is really, with thoughts we know what to do from our meditation. When the thought comes, you let it go. Feelings the same thing, but you sit still with them, I guess is another way to say it. So can you stay with the feelings and allow them to be there? It is what we do when we sit. I'm not talking about anything new here. Reverend Master Daishin once gave a talk which was called Intimacy, Not Immunity. He was speaking about being intimate with fear. He said that practice is not to eliminate the negative and accentuate the positive. It is to be this, to find enlightenment right here in birth and death, i.e., find it right here in this actual situation which is here. So in this case, in doubt. So when doubt is there, to become intimate with it. It's quite a startling thing to take in, isn't it? To become intimate with it. But actually, what other way is there? As I say, running around and avoiding it doesn't help. There's no magic technique that I know of. There's no immunity. The only way really is through it or with it. And you will one day, if you haven't done so already. As you carry on practice, this is something that it just becomes inevitable, really. So what does it mean to be intimate with doubt? And it struck me that a kind of gentle and straightforward analogy might help. And this one, for me, gives a bit of a sense of what I think it might mean. When you first see a work of art, say like a masterpiece, really work of art, what happens, I think, is when you first see it, your brain kind of scans it, summarizes it, maybe labels it, and you have a reaction like, oh, that's nice. No, I don't think I like that. Or you might just be neutral and kind of shrug it off. But if you stay then with it and keep looking at it, then things emerge from within this work of art. You begin to see details of the content and the way the light is maybe, or the composition. And it might evoke a feeling in you. And you may begin to see the strokes or the way that it's been painted. And can become quite absorbed in it, and there's a real connection. And this to me is a sense of becoming intimate with the painting, so not separate from it. So it isn't just something that we see. Initially you just see it and that's it, but if you stay with it, it's kind of experienced. You kind of know it. It's something that's a bit hard to describe. I don't think you can pin it down. It's something quite intuitive and non-verbal, kind of in the moment. It's like body and mind just being with what's here. And being with what here is actually obviously our natural state, because we are where we are. Being with is our connection. There's not a contrivance here at all. And we can't avoid our connection, but fears and doubts, wishing to protect ourselves, can cause us to withdraw, to kind of pull down the shutters, so to speak. But there isn't a physical threat. So it's like it's mental shutters we pull down, like we pull away or turn away. So to be with is actually our true nature. And something helps us when we turn in this direction. I'll say a bit more about that later. So there's an aspect of faith here. And one of the reasons I think we fear to speak about doubt, I think might be that we have a mistaken view around faith and doubt. That, we're not seeing it clearly. It's not as we might think. So do you think that the arising of doubt indicates an absence of faith? Or do you think that faith is immunity from doubt? So if you have faith, you shouldn't doubt. It's not quite like that. Doubt can come at any time, as I say, triggered by this coming together of past and current circumstances, and there's something that crops up. As I say, it's up to us how much we go with it. But faith is being with doubt or fear when it's here, opening to it, without really knowing what that means or what's going to happen, but being open to it and staying with it, staying anyway. Now that to me is faith. And by being with doubt, we allow it to run its course when it's here for us for this time. And we get to see what goes on. So seeing and knowing the territory, doubt loses its power. So you can come to see that you don't need to fear it as you might have done. Doubt can't harm us, though it can still be very challenging when it's there. The sitting we've done helps us with this. We may feel that we're not able to be still in the midst of a challenging situation, but you don't know. When you have a basis of sitting, which you do have, most of you, I don't know all of you, when you have a basis of sitting, something is here that helps us. When we let go and ground ourselves, something supports us. So in a way you could say, we draw on our sitting and our connection. And to me this is what being true is. So at some point when doubt arises, when you're alone and you see an opportunity, I'd just encourage you to not add on to the thoughts that come and to see if you can stay with the feelings. Letting go of however wobbly you might feel about it, that doesn't matter. Just being there and breathing. Actually, the moment shows us it isn't complicated. I know it's not easy. So there's a way you can kind of follow. A certain feeling will come and you be still with that, something else will come. Just like meditation, really. So whatever way it goes, if you just follow it. When we do something like this, there's something I can't describe too well, but it's quite important, I think. Not just with doubt, but with anything. When you take a step that's difficult in training, in facing something, there's a sense of, I don't know whether you'd say a sense of rightness, that something is right here. A sense of maybe you're moving through something or taking a step that we really want to take. So it feels possibly like a bit like something says yes in response. It reminds me of me in the Kanzion scripture, where it says if you turn towards whatever difficult situation we're in, we find compassion. Help comes. And it does. It might not be quite what we think. So there is this aspect of when we're willing to take a step in faith, we're not abandoned. That sounds very emotive. I didn't mean to say that, but there you are. We're not abandoned. Something actually helps us. Now, I wanted to read a bit to you from this book. Here, can you see? It says Everyday Zen by Charlotte Joko Beck. Everyday Zen. This is the very first book I read when I came to practice. I think it was before I came here. And I got it on my bookshelf still, and I've been reading it again lately, and I really like it. And there's a bit in here that I want to read. Joko Beck was a disciple of Maizumi, and she died about 10 years ago. So this is on page 51. So the chapter is called A Bigger Container. So what she says is, what is created, what grows, is the amount of life I can hold without it upsetting me or dominating me. At first this space is quite restricted. Then it gets a bit bigger. Then it's bigger still. It need never cease to grow. And the enlightened state is that enormous and compassionate space. But as long as we live, we find there is a limit to our container's size, and it is at that point that we must practice. And how do we know where this cut-off point is? We're at that point when we feel any degree of upset or of anger or maybe of doubt. It's not a mystery at all. And the strength of our practice is how big that container can get. And she says, as we do this practice, we need to be charitable with ourselves. We need to recognize when we're unwilling to do it. No one is willing all the time. And it's not bad when we don't do it. We will always do what we're ready to do when we're ready to do it. And I think if you kind of go back like what I was saying when a bit earlier, that when we get to know doubt and see it, it's like you kind of give space for it, think of her analogy. You can allow it because initially it's, oh goodness, this is terrible. But then you become familiar with it, you're willing to look at it, and then we have the space for it. I just got a little analogy which quite struck me recently. A few weeks ago, I was fortunate enough to go on a solitary retreat. I was staying alone in a small cottage by the sea, which was really lovely. And I took a walk on the beach every day. It was quite a small stretch of beach. It's a really messy beach, actually. There's lots of stones and rocks, a ton of seaweed, and some sand. And I'd go and walk there every day. And what struck me very much is how different the shoreline was every day. Now, there's an obvious one. There was a heavy storm in the night, and when I walked in the morning, there was a massive layer of seaweed, like a thick carpet. There was all this driftwood there, and rocks covering the beach, and you couldn't even see the sand at all. And then other days I'd go, and it actually would be a sandy beach, with just a few stones in. And then one day, the sand was in waves. The sand was actually in waves. And then sometimes when I'd be walking on it, you suddenly come to this wet patch where your feet sink in, and then it goes firm again. And sometimes the waves would be quite big, and sometimes there were these tiny little wavelets just trickling over the pebbles. It was really lovely. When I walk by the sea, I get right up to the waves. I find that really helpful. Tiny little wavelets. Then one day, there were hundreds of tiny little black shells just in this one spot. And then they were never there again. There was a tractor tyre in the seaweed one morning. I have no idea where that came from. And one day I saw dolphins diving, which was absolutely lovely. Apparently they live in that bay all the time, so they're always there, and I was lucky enough to see them. And another day I was astonished to find an octopus lying just on the shoreline. I've never seen one before. Maybe it had just been washed up, but I picked it up and put it back in the sea and it disappeared. And there was a flatfish there, you know how strange they are, with the two eyes on top of the head. So there's all this here. And yet we see the waves lapping on the beach, and we see a horizon, we say, oh, that's the sea. And we've got no idea, really, of all that's in the sea. This great depth that's there. Thousands of millions of life forms. All these currents and tides moving in connection with the moon, and with storms and with weather, and all kinds of conditions, you know, some of which I don't know about. And I was struck that the shoreline is the way it is, was the way it was every morning, in response to all the circumstances of everything that was around it. And some of the circumstances were clear, like the morning after the storm, but most of them were quite unknown to me. So of all the things that were in the sea, unseen where I was on the beach, the millions of things in the sea, what gets thrown up? So what does a tide leave on the beach? Okay, so that's the analogy. So I'm Alina, I'm 5 foot, I'm in the mid-60s, I'm a female monk. I could go on adding to that list, maybe give some personal attributes, but still, it says absolutely nothing about what being me is. So what struck me was that anything can show up on our shoreline at any time in response to circumstances and the depth of our past experience. You know, everybody we've ever met, everything we've ever done, all of that is somehow in the mix of us and can get triggered by things. And how we've interpreted things too and processed them, that's important too. So it isn't the actual experience that's in here, it's our very partial memory, perception and interpreting that's kind of in here. So we're completely a part of what's happening around us, and we really don't know what's going to happen or what's possible. So what is there to judge? So when you look at it in this way, can we just meet and accept the shoreline that we've got today and just see what it is and see what's called for? So it's going to be different with the next tide or the next moment, and there's endless depth and possibility there that often surprises us. It's like a kind of reshaping constantly taking place, like we're living and moving with everything that's in our life. So kind of a summary then, just to say, something can change for us with doubts when we just become willing to see what's going on. Anytime we're able to stay with it, even for 1 millisecond, that makes a difference. We don't want to, we feel we can't, and most of the time probably we can't. But not to make assumptions, you just don't know. And this openness to face doubt, if sitting here now you think, yeah, I'm willing to do that. Openness to face doubt, when we catch it, that really opens the door here in training. Quite a significant thing. It makes a real change. It just isn't the same when you've faced it as when it is when you're constantly trying to get rid of it or push it away or ignore it. You're not getting anywhere with it. And so I just wanted to say too, that as you go on in training for a long time, it can be pretty unsettling at times. And I think this refers to what Master Leandra talked about on a retreat recently, about groundlessness. As you keep sitting and practicing, you can counter more this groundlessness. And that's pretty unsettling. And I think there's just a great trust in doing the simple work of sitting and practicing. So I just wanted to say, so don't be put off if you find yourself feeling unsettled. That's not a reason to doubt. It's just perhaps the way training is unfolding at that time. And there's always more to see.